The French Chef is made possible by a grant from the Polaroid Corporation.
You may remember our lovely chocolate cake, the Queen of Sheba, La Reine de Saba. This is her noble cousin, Le Marquis au Chocolat. Under his sober chocolate cloak lies a coating of French buttercream and a chocolate sponge cake. We're doing Le Marquis au Chocolat aujourd'hui sur Le French Chef. Welcome to the French Chef. I'm Julia Child. Today we're doing a delicious French chocolate cake called Le Marquis au Chocolat. The French sponge cake mixture is one that you've seen many times before, and I wanted you to see it again because it is one of the basic French batters. In France, it's called a pâte à biscuit, meaning a batter for a biscuit, which means a sponge cake. And I think that one of the ways to learn how to cook is to recognize when you see sponge cake and you've done it or seen it several times, you know exactly what it is. You can say, oh, well, I know that. All it is egg yolks and sugar and flour and beaten egg whites. And if it's chocolate, it has a chocolate mixture. And it's the same kind of a sponge cake batter that you use for lady fingers or for a yellow sponge cake or for one of those long sponge sheets that you use for a bûche de Noël. And this cake batter, before you start out making it, the first thing you should do is to set your oven at 350 degrees. I've already done it. And then you want to prepare your pan. And this is an 8-inch one-piece pan. They always measure the top, which is 8 inches, and it's 1.5 inches deep. And if you're making a French cake, you butter it, which just means taking about half a teaspoon of softened butter and smearing it all around the pan so that you've covered the bottom and sides. And then you put in some flour. This can be either all-purpose flour or cake flour. And then you just roll the flour around in the pan so that you coat the sides and the bottom thoroughly. And that means that the cake is not going to stick, and then you just knock out the excess flour. And then your pan is ready, and you set it aside, and you're ready to start in on your sponge cake batter. And we're going to have 3 eggs. Somebody sent me a cartoon on how to separate eggs. You just put them in 3 different places. But for this recipe, we are going to separate the eggs by breaking the whites into a container and breaking the yolks into another container. Because a sponge cake batter has eggs separated this way, and the 3 yolks are going to go into the bowl of our electric mixer. And then we're going to gradually beat in 1/2 cup of granulated sugar. And as always in one of these recipes where you are going to beat eggs and sugar together, you want to add your sugar gradually. Because if you add it all at once, you may find that your egg yolks have turned granular and sort of speckled. So you see, I'm just sprinkling in that 1/2 cup of sugar into my 3 egg yolks. Then I'm going to turn the beater on fairly high because it has to beat for about 2 or 3 minutes, and I'm now going to do my egg whites. I always like to do egg whites by hand, and I have here an ordinary stainless steel bowl and a great big balloon whip. These you can usually get at a hotel supply place or at a French importing shop. And we have our 3 egg yolks, which I didn't bring over, 3 egg whites, and these go into the bowl. And then you start beating fairly slowly until the egg whites begin to foam. And then as soon as they foam like this, and gotten well mixed up, you would then add just a pinch of cream of tartar. That's less than 1/4 of a teaspoonful, and you'd add a little bit of salt. And that's about 1/8 of a teaspoon of salt, and then you continue beating. And the cream of tartar, which is an acid, helps the egg whites keep their shape when they're finally beaten. And you should really, if you're not using a copper bowl, an unlined copper with which you don't need cream of tartar, any recipe that calls for beaten egg whites, you should add cream of tartar to it. This is one of the objects of seeing people cook, so that you learn the rules and you can begin correcting recipes yourself. Now, when the egg whites have become soft, form soft peaks, you then would sprinkle in a heaping tablespoon of granulated sugar and go on beating until they make stiff peaks. See, my motion at first was an up and down circular motion, and now I'm sort of going round and round in a circle. They aren't quite stiff enough yet. Now, these are stiff enough, and I want you to see them. You see they're forming little peaks like that, and they hold in the wires of the whip, so they're done. And then you want to beat your egg yolks and sugar until they make the ribbon. I want you to see the ribbon. See, when I lift it up, it makes a very definite ribbon on the surface. And that's what we want. It's pale yellow and makes the ribbon. And we're going to add to that our chocolate flavoring. And this is 1 cup of chocolate bits, which are these semi-sweet little chocolate bits, which have been melted with 2 tablespoons of strong coffee. And into that, we're going to beat 3½ tablespoons of softened butter, and this can be either salted butter or unsalted. It doesn't make any difference. And that just gets stirred in, and as long as I'm going to put that back into the beater, I don't have to stir it in too thoroughly. Be sure that your melted chocolate is not too hot, because you don't want to scramble your egg yolks. And then, I've got a little dripping off of here. I'll put that back in again. And then we just beat this up. And that just gets beaten up until the butter is thoroughly mixed in. And then as soon as that's ready, our batter is all ready, and we can start folding in our egg whites and flour. I'll disassemble this a little bit there. Now, we have folding, which we've done a great deal before. And when you put chocolate into a batter, the batter gets rather thick. So you want to take a good dollop of your egg whites and just stir them in, and that loosens the batter. And then we have 2/3 cup of sifted cake flour. And remember, when you're measuring, that you would sift the flour into the cup and then return it to the sifter. And this is going to be alternating folding the egg whites and the flour. So I'm putting in about 1/5 of the egg whites, 1/5 of the flour, and then some more egg whites, and I just start folding with a rubber spatula. And the object is to keep the egg whites completely inflated. We've done so much folding that I don't have to go into it very much, but I just want to point out to you this method of folding whenever you have a stiff batter. And again, you can correct the recipe, any recipe that doesn't tell you to do this. Now I'll go over those ingredients again in case you want to write them down. We had 3 egg yolks and 1/2 cup of sugar. And then we have 1 cup of melted chocolate and 3.5 tablespoons of butter. And then we have 3 stiffly beaten egg whites and 2/3 cup of sifted cake flour. You see how rapidly you can fold in. And then this goes into our prepared cake pan. I didn't fold in all the flour there, which I'll have to do. This has just a very little amount of flour in it. You can also add additional flavor to your chocolate by melting it with 2 tablespoons of strong coffee. And now our batter goes right into the cake pan. This gets simply poured in. And then bang your pan very lightly and then turn it around so that the batter rises up to the top. And that is so that when the cake rises in the oven, you won't have a hump in the middle. So now it's ready to bake. And that makes lovely licking, that bowl. I'll take a little bit so I go to the oven. And this goes into a 350-degree oven, and it's going to bake for 25 to 30 minutes. I wish I had time for you to see it come out again, but I have another one which is ready. And I've baked it, and then you unmold it on a rack, and when it's cool, if you're not going to bake it right away, I say I molded it upside down and let it cool. And then when it was perfectly cool so it wouldn't dry out, I put the pan over it. And you notice you can see a little bit of the marks from a rack. But the cake, you can tell when it's done because it will rise up to about the top of the pan and the top will crack. You see all that little crackiness, that's normal. And when it's done, you'll see the very tiniest amount of shrinkage from the sides of the pan, and then it will shrink a little bit more as it cools. You let it cool 5 minutes before unmolding it. And then if you want to keep it, put it back in its pan and cover it, and it freezes perfectly. So I shall unmold it again. And then you can't fill it until it's absolutely cool. So allow it to cool, and then you're ready to fill it. And what we're going to make as a filling for this is a French buttercream filling and icing, which is called crème au beurre. And there are several ways of making it, and the way we're going to do is called crème au beurre à l'anglaise, which means that it is a custard base, and then the butter goes into it. And I have here 4 egg yolks, and they go into a little stainless pan, and then they get beaten up. We've made custard sauce many times before, and I want you to see it done again, and so that you realize how very many things it goes into. I'm beating up the egg yolks first, and then I'm beating in 2/3 cup of sugar. And again, this is beaten in very gradually. I think you don't realize when you're first starting out to cook that so many things are like so many other things. And if you've done them once, you'll recognize them when you see them again. And be sure always to pay attention to these various things. So you'll say, well, I've done that before. Now I have 1/2 cup of hot milk, and this I'm gradually beating into the egg yolks and sugar. And always remember when it's hot that you beat this in a very thin stream. Now, this is going to be beaten over moderate heat until it thickens and coats the spoon. And this is a custard sauce base. And if you put more milk in it, it would be a regular custard sauce which you use for puddings Or you also have a custard sauce base for ice cream and for Bavarian cream, and many chocolate mousses have the same thing. And you can heat this over barely simmering water, but it takes so long to do. I think it's much better to heat it right over direct heat, because you can always lift your pan on and off. And you just stir it, and now after it's sort of well mixed up, I'm going to start stirring it with a wooden spatula, because that's much easier to see whether how the sauce is thickening. And you'll notice first that there's sort of foam on the top. And when the foam begins to subside, and when also we see some steam coming up, that will show that it is almost thick enough. But you have to, when you're making a custard sauce, you have to have it, just stir it and heat it until it really does become thick enough. The difficulty is that you have to not heat it too quickly or too hard, or your egg yolks will scramble. And they scramble at about 165 degrees. You can put a thermometer in this, but it's much better just to do it over direct heat and use your eyes. And then also you use your fingers too. You put it in, and you can tell how it's coming along by how hot your finger is. We haven't quite seen the steam come up yet, so it's not quite ready, but it is much quicker doing it this way than in your simmering water. Egg yolks and the whole business of using eggs in cookery is the most difficult and tricky part of cookery. And once you've mastered it, and the only way you can master it is just to do it. And even in a case like this, if your egg yolks curdle, strain it out and use your sauce for something else and do it over again. But I think once you've done it once or twice, your fear leaves you. It's just like making hollandaise by hand. You just really, if you're going to consider yourself a cook, you just have to know how to do this by hand over direct heat. And then I don't think there's really much else that's tricky in egg cookery, and I think when you've mastered it, then you really feel that you're coming along as a cook. Now notice here we have the steam coming up, and at this point be very careful, and I'm moving this a little bit to the side of the heat, and that is almost coating our spoon. It needs just a little bit longer, but at this point you have to go on and keep on cooking it, and you notice I'm stirring it so it reaches all over to the bottom of the pan. And then very suddenly it gets thick enough. You see that's lying on the spoon, and that is thick enough. And then this has to cool off and be strained, and then you're ready to go on with the rest of the buttercream. So I have some that is cooled off and ready to go. And this is in the bowl of the electric beater. With my electric beater, I have an extra bowl and an extra whip, so that there's so many recipes you can use, you have to use it twice. So now that just begins getting beaten up. And then, the end of this is very simple. We beat in 2 sticks of unsalted butter that's been softened. This goes in about 2 big hunks at a time, the way I'm doing it. I think that's going a little bit fast. This is not a dietary recipe, but I wanted you to see exactly how the real buttercream is made, because it's the most delicious kind of a frosting. And a French cake you should consider as a dessert cake, or practically as candy. You don't eat great big hunks of it, you just eat a little bit. Now after that is perfectly smooth and the butter has been well melted into it, you then add your flavoring, and you would always add half a tablespoon of vanilla, and then whatever other flavoring you want. In this case, I think rum goes extremely well with chocolate, so I'll put in a tablespoon or 2 of dark rum. This makes a lovely, lovely flavoring. Kirsch is delicious, or you could beat in 2 or 3 tablespoons of of melted chocolate. And then sometimes after your liquid flavoring has gone in, you'll notice that it separates a little tiny bit. But in that case, you simply beat in a little more softened butter and it will smooth out immediately. And so now, this is much too soft to ice the cake with. So you have to chill it until it has firmed up but is of spreading consistency, and then your cake is cool and your icing is ready, and you're going to split the cake to fill it. A French cake is always done this way. And when you split it, take a little knife and make a wedge on the side of the cake. This is all going to be covered up by frosting so it won't show. And then you take a big knife, I'm using a ham slicer, and just cut it in half. See, this is quite different than the big American cakes we're all used to. I think it makes it really much easier to cook and serve if you only have to cook it in one plate, one dish. And then when you take your cake off, you see you have this little wedge so that you can fit it back together again. And if there are little holes in the center, it makes no difference at all. And then I have some ready butter cream, which I hope is of the right consistency. It used to be a little bit hard. Well, it may soften up enough. But anyway, you can see if you've left it so that it's too hard, you're going to have to either beat it in your mixer or let it soften to room temperature. So I'll just fill it with this soft mixture. And then just spread. My, that looks good. You just spread the center of the cake with the buttercream. And then you reform it. There's our little wedge. And the wedge fits in right there. Then I'm going to have to ice the cake with this soft frosting, but that's all right. You can still do it because it's going to be chilled afterwards. And I'm picking up the cake in my bare hands, which I think is the easiest way of doing it. And then you just spread it all around. Of course, this isn't any more fattening than some of those horrible icings you get that are made out of white lard and powdered sugar, because lard is just as fattening as butter, or as the high-price spread, as they call it. Gosh. This is really, when you go to France and eat some of those pastries that they make, they're all made with this kind of a butter cream. My, they're good. And then this you put on rather roughly, and you can smooth it out after it has chilled in the refrigerator. And then just lay it down on your cake rack. And it is then ready to, it has to be chilled, and then we're ready to put on our chocolate covering. So you can see why it's very useful to have a cake rack, because it catches all the mess. So I'm going to put this in the ice box, and I have one that has been chilled. It takes, probably half an hour, or you can even let it take longer, so that your covering has chilled. And you see at this point, you can dip a big knife into hot water, and you can smooth around any edges that aren't very smooth. And with this, there are little dots of cake on the top, but it doesn't make any difference. And now we have our chocolate covering. And this is melted chocolate, which I've melted with about half a cup of coffee. And I have about 3 packages in here because I wanted to be sure and have enough. Now, one thing, this is the most important thing to remember with your when you're melting chocolate, because it can turn sort of grainy and black unless you're extremely careful. And I found the best way to do is to put the pan in very hot water. Put your chocolate pan in, put your chocolate drops in your water up in, and then take the pan immediately off of heat, and then stir it up and let it sit, and then keep going back and stirring it up until it's absolutely smooth. You see, there isn't a lump in that at all. If you find there are any lumps, strain it through a very fine sieve. And now you're all ready, and your chocolate isn't too warm, and your cake frosting is chilled. And remember that, you just pour the chocolate right over. You need to have a lot so that it will cover the whole cake. Isn't that lovely? You see, turning it around and the whole thing is veiled. But once you have covered it, I see there is a little bit here that hasn't been covered. You cannot do anything over the top of the cake anymore. It will make a lump. So you should really watch it so that you're sure that it's covered everything. And then again, you chill it, and having it on a tray, you can collect the melted chocolate again. And then this again you have to chill. So, and then when it's chilled, you put it on your cake platter, and there you are, ready to serve. But because you have a buttercream frosting, it's just like butter. It's going to melt if you leave it out in a hot room, so that you have to keep it in the refrigerator until you're just about ready to serve it. I should have a nice serving plate here, but I don't. But I want you to see how it looks when it's cut. And this 8-inch cake will serve probably 8 to 10 people. You just cut it like any ordinary cake. And that piece is about 1.5 inches across. But here you are, how it looks on the plate. You see, there you have your buttercream, and there you have your chocolate. And it's absolutely delicious to eat. Now I'll go over a few of those steps again, is which after you have cooked your cake, you let it unmold for about you let it sit in its mold for about 5 minutes. And then you unmold it, and you have to be sure and let it get cool before you frost it. And when you're using your frosting, that had 4 egg yolks and 2/3 cup of sugar, and then 1/2 cup of hot milk beaten into it. And then you thicken that over heat until it coats the spoon, and then you strain and cool it, and then you beat in 2 sticks of unsalted butter. And as you could see, it would have been better if I had chilled it a little bit before I spread it over the cake. And then be sure after you've iced your cake that you let the frosting chill in the icebox so you can pour over your chocolate. When I poured over the chocolate that time, I think it was a little bit too warm, because you could see there was some of the buttercream coming through. So everybody has eaten chocolate cake, but until you've tasted this Marquis au Chocolat, I think you haven't really lived. So that's all for today on The French Chef. This is Julia Child. Bon appétit.
Julia Child is co-author of the book Mastering the Art of French Cooking.